Hello, good people. In this video, we're going to be going over an important part of human resources management, or HRM, and that is the recruitment and selection of employees or staff. Um, if we understand that we can't run our business alone, or run a business alone as management or as a chef, then we need to hire employees. What complicates this is not every staff member is going to be a good staff member. So when we're attracting or recruiting and selecting our employees, we want to make sure we're doing our best. I'm hoping that this presentation will show you in industry some common practices of where to find good candidates, how to develop ways to and how to develop ways to select good candidates for the positions open in your restaurant. Remember that employment is a relationship between an employee and an employer. However, on the employer side, it's much more of an investment in your staff. Our learning objectives for today. We have four major learning objectives. One is we're going to be able to describe various recruitment policies to make job vacancies more attractive. We're going to show you a list of various sources from which job applications can be drawn from, okay, and the advantages and disadvantages of both. And then we're going to be able to determine effective selection criteria to select the best candidates for our open positions. Lastly, because Gen Y is such a big, very representative of candidate pools within hospitality and food service, we're going to show you who those people are. Okay, so some of their demographics, and we're going to explain the needs and expectations of that group, specifically about who they work for. So firstly, what is recruitment? Recruitment is very simply the process of finding and attracting qualified candidates to apply for an employment opportunity that you have within your restaurant. Okay. Recruitment is the responsibility of the human resources department, or in many cases, the chef or a specific manager. We need to be recruiting new staff that have the skills and abilities that will make our organization successful in the present time, but also in the future. Okay, we'll talk about that a little bit later on with respect to the job description, as well as skills, competencies, and qualifications. One example I'd give here is it's not enough just to put an ad up on whatever to tell people that you have an open spot or job within your organization. Okay, it's much like fishing without any bait on your hook. Okay, you need to be able to attract the right candidate for the job. Okay, and sometimes that's easier said than done. In the next slide, we'll be going over recruitment sources or even some methods whereby you can recruit the kind of candidate that you want. So here's where we're talking about recruitment methods. Okay, it's important to really realize that the perfect candidate doesn't always come to you. You kind of have to look in the right place. And within that, various recruitment methods have different costs and advantages and disadvantages. In the next slide, we'll be talking about where you can recruit people from. Okay, so several different options that you have as a chef, as a manager, or as even an entrepreneur. And then we're going to tell you which ones are more likely to yield the kind of people that you want. Although it does depend on the context, of course, right? But typically speaking, if we're hiring millennials, there's a specific place where we want to go. All right, recruitment sources. Okay, so these are some sources or places where you can post a job ad or look for candidates for open positions within your restaurant, hotel, whatever the case. We're going to start at the top, and we're going to work clockwise. Okay, so first, we have colleges and universities. You probably know from your experience that there are career fairs that we hold. Okay, they do that at both colleges and universities. Okay, an advantage of going to a college or a university to recruit potential candidates is that okay, these people are you know that they're qualified because they're within the college or the university, and you would hope that they will soon have their diploma or their degree. Okay, it's also a good place, to get out and network. You get to meet with these people face to face. You can take in a large amount of resumes if you want. Okay, so quite a few advantages here. Some disadvantages of colleges and universities is that people they might not be graduating soon, right? Um, and these people might represent entry level staff within your organization. Okay, I mean that specifically with universities. I remember I went to a job fair at the University of Guelph, and Xerox was hiring, and I got an interview. I gave them my resume. I got an interview and stuff like that. And I found out that I knew what the job was. It was a sales job, right? I knew that uh, this was my first job out of university, but I didn't know that such an entry level job paid so little. Okay, so um, a lot of the jobs that you're going to get from colleges or universities might be entry level. Okay, maybe not in our industry. Okay, so sous chefs and managers can be hired in this way. I've seen it happen. Um, and and yeah, they're a good source for potential candidates for your positions. Okay. As we move around, now we have public and private employment agencies. Okay, so some employment agencies work for the government or for the region. Okay, so that's Halton, Peel, Toronto, Durham, Hamilton, Niagara. These agencies help people find jobs. Okay, you can also have private employment agencies. These people are called headhunters, not because they hunt heads, but because they find people jobs and they get a commission out of it. Okay, so it's their job to find you a job. Okay. Um, Sometimes with the public employment agencies, the pool is there's a lot of people in that pool. They may or may not have the skills that you need. Okay, so you're kind of limited there a little bit. The headhunters or the private employment agencies can be extremely expensive. When you're using a headhunter, you usually pay upwards of 10 to 15% of the yearly salary as a fee to the headhunter. Okay, my dad used to be a headhunter, made lots of money at doing it, but it cost his clients quite a bit of money. Um, the private headhunters are generally more effective because they have an invested interest of getting people jobs and working with the employers. That said, most private headhunters or private employment agencies, because they get a commission, they're not finding people jobs that are going to be going and working in the dish pit, right? Typically, private employment agencies or headhunters, they're finding jobs for people that are going into be like CEOs or presidents or VPs, because those salaries are much higher, right? Um, from my experience, I've never used a public or private employment agency, mainly because one is too expensive, and public agencies didn't really have the skill pool that I needed. Okay. Um, as we move around here, another source of recruitment or candidates is electronic recruitment. So this is social media and the internet. Okay, we've all seen Indeed and Monster. These are examples of internet recruiting. But there's also social media, right? So most restaurants um, are on social media, right, for promotional purposes, but they don't just promote their products and they don't just promote, discounts and sales. They also promote open jobs. Okay, we use that one quite a bit, especially Instagram. So we would post a post on Instagram that says, now hiring. Okay, and the Instagram account was localized to our business only. Electronic recruitment can be fairly cheap. Um, Obviously, it doesn't cost money to have an Instagram account. However, if you're actually going to promote or advertise these open positions to a wider audience, sometimes there's a fee. Okay, so I think on Facebook for a month, I think it's like $100 to advertise something. Okay, but still fairly low cost, right? Next, we have newspaper advertising. Now, you can put one job ad in the newspaper and they print millions or thousands of copies of that newspaper. So you have a huge reach with the newspaper, so large volume, but you get low quality recruits, right? In fact, I read the newspaper. I read it on my phone. I don't look at the job openings anymore. I don't know who does. So I'd be wary of the newspaper advertising. Continuing, we also have direct applicants and referrals. Okay, so this is people coming into the restaurant, coming in much like you probably did with your externship. If you did an externship, I don't know, I guess this class, you would be doing your externship during this class. Anyhoozle. Typically, pre-COVID, you could walk into a restaurant with a resume and get an interview on the spot. I interviewed everybody that came in through my doors, and these people are what we call direct applicants because they're coming directly to the organization and applying. Okay. We also have referrals. So this is basically, you know, when I was, in the restaurant, I ran into somebody that worked for the college. Okay, they kind of liked what I was doing. They saw the skill set that I have. I was very personable. I made a good impression on them, is what I tried to say, and they referred me to the academic chair, and that's how I started. That's like 5 years ago. That's how I started teaching. And that's an example of a referral, right? It's another person advocating for you to get a job. Okay, although there's no guarantee, this is very low cost, and it's based on self-selection, which is good. There are external sources. Okay, so very similar to direct applicants. External sources are anybody who's not within the organization, has anything to do with the organization, is coming into the organization to apply. This is a great source of new ideas or approaches. Okay, you'll find, I mean, even in our industry, but maybe not a great example is our industry. In a lot of different industries, methods change. Okay, very much like science, right? It depends on what paradigm is important or relevant at the time. But our methods change, and as they change, we need to have those people within our organization to be able to deliver on those changes, right? For example, let's say this is going to be a weird example. Let's say all of a sudden the souffle is all the rage within the Canadian food service market, and you want to be able to offer a souffle. If none of your staff know how to, so if they don't know the method to making a souffle, you can't offer a souffle, right? So using external sources of recruitment usually gives you new ideas and keeps your business up to date with the most recent skills or methods. Okay. Lastly, there's also internal sources. Okay, so this is hiring within. Okay, typically it's much faster, although from my experience it's not. Typically it's faster within food service. It's also cheaper because you're not spending money on any of these other recruitment sources, and it can be more certain, right? Because you have a pre-existing relationship with this candidate because you're hiring from within. You know what they're capable of. You know what they're not capable of. You know what I mean? You don't have to, you're saving money by not engaging any of these other recruitment sources. And it's quite quick. Okay. My example of this is when I first started, at the college, I taught probably 2 or 3 years with partial load or sessional contracts. So I taught anywhere from 12 to 18 hours a week. When there was an open job for a full-time position 2 years ago, okay, I had a referral from Chef Innes. So Chef Innes came to me and he said, "Dave, there's a spot open, a full-time spot open with the college. I think you'd be great. Have you applied?" And I said, "No, I'm going to now though." And I applied. I was an internal source, okay, and based on my track record with the college, they knew that I would certainly be a good fit for the position. Right. I interviewed, I think, in December, and I was hired full time by the new semester in January. So it was quite quick. So these are all the recruitment sources that you can possibly use. You can use one, you can use two, you can use a combination as things change, right? For example, you can go recruit at a college or university when they have a job fair, but not use that exclusively. Okay. You always want to be hiring from within when you can. Okay. Because you've trained those people already and you've been developing them already, right? You're kind of invested in these people. And electronic social media recruitment is really big right now. Okay, and it's super cheap, super affordable, and it has quite a bit of reach. Okay. So recruitment methods continued. I think I've spoke to a lot of these points already, but I'll go over them quite quickly, and there's some new ones I want you to be aware of as well. So the first point here, we definitely want to be developing and hiring internally. Okay, this boosts morale and contributions. okay? But you have to make sure you do it effectively, okay? For example, yeah, we want to hire internally so that we develop our people and we support them, okay? We have a pre-existing relationship with them, but we have to make sure we select the right person, okay? Um, Back like one of my very first years in our industry, I was a cook, okay? There was a kitchen manager position open, okay? Just so happened two people applied for that job internally. One was, had been with the company for 6 years, okay, knew every position, every station, and there was the second person who had been there for maybe 2 years and was dating the manager. You can guess who got the job, right? There was a little bit of bias there. Did not follow proper selection criteria and hired a person that was not as qualified as another person. Okay, that should have got the job. So while hiring internally can promote good morale and contributions and things like that, if you do it incorrectly, it can actually have the opposite effect. So that person who didn't get the job and had been with the company for it was like I forget how long, but it was quite a while. They ended up quitting because they felt like they weren't taken seriously, they weren't given a chance, it was biased, and they didn't get what they deserved. Okay. You also want to incentivize your employee referrals. Okay, I've seen gift cards being passed out if you give a referral and that person is successful in getting a job. Okay, the point of referrals is that when you're giving a referral to somebody, so if I go to my boss and I say, hey, you know that chef position that you have open, I know somebody who would be great for that position. When I say that to my employer, I'm putting my reputation on the line. Okay. So if that person comes in, they get hired based on my referral and they are terrible, that looks poorly on me. So the basis of using referrals is that there is onus on people giving a referral. Okay, they're not going to give you a referral to somebody that's not going to be good, right? So you can typically trust your people. Like I said, social media recruitment is huge right now. Okay, you could do this on Instagram, maybe Snapchat. I'm not a big Snapchat person. Instagram, Facebook, and you can also include a careers page on your company website. Okay, most big businesses have a careers page. So George Brown College has a career page, although they're not hiring right now. Pretty much any bit like Cara Foods, or sorry, Recipes Unlimited, or formerly Cara Foods, they've got a massive careers page. So if you need a job, go there because they're always hiring. You can also use campus recruitment. Okay, it's good to develop relationships with the schools by participating in career fairs, developing apprenticeships, and internship programs. Okay, you're all going to graduate. You're going to go work in industry. You're going to be, if you're not working in industry already, and you're eventually going to be the boss one day, right? Keep that relationship going. Okay, yeah. And then lastly, I mean, you can use a headhunter or a public recruiting agency, but make sure they understand what your human resources needs are. Okay, sometimes these applicant pools can be not so good, so make sure that they understand exactly what you're looking for, so that when they pull someone out of that pool, it's going to work out. Okay. So I'm just going to put this up. There we go. I didn't know there was a transition there. So recruiting continued. I think we've spoken about this at length, so I'm not going to go over this in entirety because I pretty much already have. The difference between internal and external recruiting is the difference between hiring within or promoting within and then hiring somebody outside of the organization to come in and fill a role. Obviously, the advantage of internal recruiting is it has super low cost and it's very quick. Okay, so the employees familiar with the organization. They likely don't need to be trained as much as somebody else coming in from outside the organization, and it really improves employee morale and motivation, right? But again, this has to be done correctly or it can have the opposite effect. External recruiting gives you the ability to attract new skills, new ideas, to your organization, which is an advantage. One of the disadvantages is that it's typically more expensive because you have to engage in one of those recruitment methods. So engaging on social media, external agencies, things like that. And these are, while some may be cheaper alternatives, there is no cost to internal recruiting. Okay. Um, so yeah, there's pros and cons to both. From what I've seen in industry, for higher level positions, we typically use internal recruiting. So when I'm looking for a chef, it's usually my senior sous or one of my junior sous that are applying for the job. Okay. Same thing with the general manager. Most of our MGEs, our general managers, used to be MGEs within the organization, or manager guest experience. Yeah, we do it because we know the people. There's already an existing relationship. We've trained them. They know our ways, and at the end of the day, it improves employee morale. All right, so now we're going to talk about millennials. Okay. So millennials, the reason we're going to be talking about millennials is they have such a huge presence right now in the labor market, and they're very different from other age categories or other generations. So it's important that we talk about how we can attract millennials, what they look for, and what they need from jobs. So quickly, just a quick differentiation between Generation Y and Generation X. Okay, Generation X are those people that were born between the 1960s and the 1980s. Okay, these people, are aging in the workforce right now, and they're segueing out into retirement. Okay, and these positions are being picked up by people, millennials or Generation Y, which are people born between the 1980s and the early 2000s. By this definition, I'm a millennial. And there's some significant differences between these two generations and what they look for from a job and how we attract them to an open position. So some characteristics of millennials or Generation Y. First, they're the largest generation in history. Okay, they're huge. Okay, when Generation X, they Generation X made a lot of money, and when they made a lot of money, they had a lot of kids. Okay, because they could support the family sizes, or at least that's what I assume, and that created Generation Y or millennials, us. Okay, we're also the most educated generation in the Western history. Okay, we have a lot more access to the funding to get an education, but also there are certain programs in place that make sure that education is really valued. Okay, and it's one of those things that the Generation X didn't necessarily have and they advocated for. So, for example, my dad. Okay, my dad's got a high school education. For some reason, the day I was born, my dad knew I was going to university. Also, the day I was born, my dad knew I was getting an MBA, and then eventually I decided to get a DBA. So we're very educated. Okay, we're also very tech savvy. Okay, you probably know this because you probably have gotten a few questions from your parents on how to use various different pieces of technology. For example, printers. As I got a call yesterday from my mom because her printer wasn't working. We are global citizens. We're nomadic. No longer do we call one place home for an extended period of time. While I'm not terribly nomadic, my fiance is. So my fiance, she was born in India, came to the States when she was 18, went back to India for a little bit, and then came to Canada, and she's been in Canada ever since. So no longer do borders keep us bound to one place. We're very entrepreneurial. Okay, we're also very opinionated, which kind of goes hand in hand if you think about it. So we like to be our own boss, and we do startups quite often. Okay, we're very progressive. Okay, we embrace diversity. We're also very cognizant of sustainability, which is a first for Generation Y. Okay, so we're more conscious of our sociological and our environmental impacts. Okay, and we understand that those two pillars are just as important as the financial pillar when we're talking about business. Okay, we're great communicators. Okay, mainly because we are very tech savvy. You can communicate in so many different ways, between sending a snap, posting a picture on Instagram, a message on Facebook, talking, calling, texting. We're great communicators. Okay, however, we are a little impatient. Okay, we generally like instant gratification. We want answers and we want services. Okay. This can hinder us a little bit, especially the instant gratification. You know what I mean? Like starting a job, working for 6 months, and wanting a promotion. It doesn't happen like that. In fact, I worked in industry for probably 12 years before I got a GM spot. I also had to work my butt off with the college to get a full-time spot. So it wasn't always instant. And I knew that it was very frustrating to me that I couldn't get what I wanted quicker. Um, yeah. Anyway, so these are some of the characteristics of millennials. And in the next few slides, we're gonna show you what they want and how to attract them. So how do we recruit millennials? Okay, so we have to use technology because they are super engaged on social media. Okay, have mobile friendly sites because that's how they're essentially going to access your website. Okay, we can use when you're doing a screening interview, you can do it over the phone, you can do it in video. Okay, these millennials know how to do that, or we know how to do that. You also want to emphasize your company culture, be a good corporate citizen. Okay, so it's a lot of sustainability. Okay, offer some improved work-life balance because that's what millennials love, and have transparent goals. Okay, gone are the days where if there's a direction from the company, millennials kind of need to know why that is. Furthermore, and this is a lot of what brought up, it's a not-for-profit called Not 9 to 5. Okay, so this is emphasizing work-life balance, but also a lot of mental health. Okay, highlight the perks of your positions. Is there a flexible schedule? Is there desirable benefits? More importantly, provide a path for a promotion or an advancement opportunities. So upward movement in the ladder. And then make it easy for them to learn about you and your work environment. Okay, these are all fairly self-explanatory because these are big pieces of who millennials are. Okay, so we use a lot of technology. They're very tech savvy. They're very progressive, like diversity, and they're good world citizens. They want a business to be like that, or their workplace to be like that. And they're a little impatient, so make sure that they know what the corporate goals are and why the perks of working for you. So now before we go into selection, okay, so at this point we've picked oh my goodness, a recruitment method. We've recruited some candidates. Before we can select one, we have to make sure we've got a good job description because that's usually what we advertise on those recruitment sites or recruitment platforms. So in the next 5 or 6 slides or so, we're going to be talking about what the job description is, some components to it, and how it can be used in the selection process. So the job description, okay? The job description is essentially what the successful candidate for a position would be like on paper, okay? The job description is critical for selection because it tells you, as a hiring manager or as a chef, and the candidates whether someone is good or not for a job. It's essentially a checklist, okay? You don't have to check all the boxes, but we need to check quite a few of them to be a good fit for the role, okay? So as a result of this, the job description has several important elements to it, okay, to communicate that fit, we'll call it, sorry. First, the job description describes the skills, competencies, and duties associated with a particular job. Okay. It defines where the job fits in the overall business. So, reporting relationships, is it at the very bottom? Is it at the top? Is it a manager position? You get an idea of the amount of authority you'll get. Okay. It provides the basis for the employment contract. So basically your salary, how many hours you're going to be working a week, things like that. Okay. And it's a valuable performance management tool because if you list all the duties required from that particular role, then you can go down and go like, okay, well, is this after we've hired the person, person A, have they done this correctly? Yes. Have they done this correctly? Yes. Can they do this correctly? No. Okay, well, that's what we need to work on. Okay, so it's a great performance management tool. So other key parts of the job description. Firstly, we have the job title. This job title should accurately reflect the nature of the job and the role, essentially, right? It should reflect the reporting relationships of the job, and it should be free of any gendering or age bias. Okay, so a chef could be equally any gender. Okay, there's no gendering there. Okay, um, you don't. One example of people gendering a job title would be one example that I can think of would be the word hostess. Uh, from my particular experience, I didn't call hostesses because it implies a female staff member. I didn't use the word hostess. I used the word host. That is more, gender inclusive. Okay. As we kind of mentioned before, the job description will also have the duties for a specific role, any skills and competency required to be able to complete said duties, any reporting relationships, a salary, and the company overview. Okay, again, because millennials want to know who they're working for, we got to be able to tell them these are the perks for working for us. We're a good corporate citizen, we're sustainable, we're ethical, and you got to tell them that. Okay, they're not just going to assume it. So now we're going to talk more specifically about the duties included on the job ad or the job description. Okay, so these are the duties and responsibilities associated and expected from a candidate within a specific role. Okay, these should be relatively short in length, whereby being fairly simple and straightforward, and it should be outcome based, right? If it's outcome based, then we can use these duties as a performance management tool. Okay, these outcome-based duties should tell us what the person has done or should be able to do, and how well. Okay, for example, one example I can think of off the top of my head, if I was doing this for a cook, one of the a bad duty, an example of a bad duty on a job description would be cut vegetables. Okay, well, that's great. Didn't tell me how to cut the vegetables or what the outcome of me cutting the vegetables are. So this would be an example of a bad description of the duty and responsibility. A better one would be able to, say julienne vegetables within a millimeter. A millimeter and I don't know 6 millimeter cutting length. Okay. And in the end, you should have around 10 to 15 duties per job description. Okay, I'm sure you can appreciate that we do lots of things in industry. You want to make them short, but you also make them characteristic or descriptive of the job. So skills and competencies. Firstly, these are not the same thing, so we have to include both on a job description. By definition, skills are activities that our potential candidates can perform based on what they've learned in the past or from qualifications that they have. Okay, a skill is generally the ability to, an example of a skill would be give presentations. It can be something learned through study or practice. Okay, these can also be things learned from your educational background. So, your labs, for example, for most culinary students. And then there's competencies, on the other hand. And by definition, these are traits or attributes that are expected of the successful candidate. Okay. An example of a competency would be strong communication, which is a characteristic. Typical competencies that you see on job descriptions would be things like leadership, teamwork, taking initiative, and communication skills. Okay, or communication. Not to be confused with a skill. And again, these are usually interpersonal characteristics, right? Together, these skills and competencies help paint a picture of who would be successful in the job that we're recruiting for. A job description will also have an indication of the reporting relationships associated with a particular role. Okay, this is essentially where responsibilities lie and who has some authority over you, or who your boss is, right? The best way to communicate these on a job ad would be to specifically specify the reporting relationships, like who you report to, who reports to you. Okay, so your bosses and who the boss, who your boss is and who you're responsible for. Okay, for example, a sous chef position. You're responsible for your line cooks for on a given shift, but you also have a boss, which is the chef. Okay. Another common way of illustrating these reporting relationships is through what we call an organizational chart, which is what I'm going to show you on the next slide. So here's a pretty typical kitchen organizational chart. When you get near the bottom are the people that have less, authority, and then the people at the top have more authority. For example, and then the people below your position with a line to it is who you're responsible for or directly responsible for. So for example, the executive chef is at the very top of the chart. Okay, so the executive chef is the overall boss for the kitchen. However, the executive chef is not necessarily responsible for everybody in the kitchen. Based on this diagram here, the chef is responsible for the coffee shop chef supervisor, the dinner restaurant chef supervisor, the sous chef, pastry chef, or the pastry chef. I can't say that word. Underneath that, okay, for example, the sous chef is responsible for the pantry chef, the saucier, the vegetable cook, the butcher, and the banquet supervisor. Okay. On the other hand, the sous chef is not responsible for pantry workers based on this diagram, or the baker. Okay. For example, the baker is the responsibility of the pastry chef. So you can tell from our discussion here and just the overall chart, you know who the boss is for what staff, and you know which staff report to specific people. Okay, for example, the pantry worker at the very bottom left here does not report to the executive chef. The pantry workers report to the pantry chef. So salaries or wages. The salary or wages is the amount of money the candidate can expect to get for a specific role. Okay, the salary or wages should represent a wage from entry level all the way to extremely experienced. Okay, this represents the wage that they could or the salary that they could possibly achieve through taking on this particular role. Okay, job descriptions should have a salary or wage range. However, many do not. I remember I asked my HR manager why we didn't always include a salary range, and one of his responses was that in the hospitality industry, the wage, because the typical employee or staff member is somebody who wants to help and wants to be of service to other people, specifically in the front of house, that these wages or salaries represented a reward. Okay, so we didn't always display it. Okay, in fact, a lot of people that asked about salary in the first interview didn't always get the job. Okay, although I think it's a pretty important piece of the employment relationship. It's compensation. It's just not always included for whatever reason. Okay, the very, very minimum we can offer somebody for a job in the hospitality industry is, I believe, $15 an hour, which is representative of minimum wage here in Ontario. That said, there are many, many employers who call themselves a livable wage employer. Typically, the livable wage is higher than minimum wage and is reflective of living in the specific community that the business is located in. Okay, if somebody is if a business is a livable wage employer, it's typically found on the job ad, because they like to advertise that to millennials, because millennials need to know that a business is being socially responsible. The company overview. So the company overview is included in every single job ad or job description that I've ever seen. The company overview is basically telling a potential candidate who the business is, or what the business is, what the company's missions, goals, and key leaders are, and its significance within a particular industry. Okay, it's usually all good things about the business, right? It includes maybe a short-term goals, long-term goals, where they see the company going, and it includes the company's general business philosophy. Okay, The philosophy can be around, obviously it's going to be around food. It could be around being environmentally sustainable, socially responsible, farm to plate, 5 mile diet or 5 mile menu. And the reason they include this philosophy is because you're trying to connect or attract millennials, right? Because these people are the largest population in our workforce currently. Millennials want to know who they're working for. They want to know that they're working for a progressive, ethical company. So now we're going to talk about selection. So at this point, we would have picked a recruitment method. Okay, we would have recruited some people using common methods aimed towards millennials, and now it comes to picking which candidate to hire. Okay, so this is nearing the end of the recruitment process. Ooh, I'm gonna put these all up. There we go. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the selection process. Okay, so depending on the way you look at it, the selection process can involve 7 or 8 steps, depending on how you believe the review of application fits in here. Okay. Typically, the selection process starts with setting up pre-screening interviews. But before we do that, we have to review the applications for the candidates that we've are recruiting. Okay, we review the applications. We look for fit between the job description and their cover letter and resume. When those two overlap quite a bit, meaning they have the skills, competencies, education, qualifications that you're looking for and want to work for a company like yours, these people, there's quite a bit of overlap between those two documents, and we call that overlap fit. Okay. On the other hand, if they did not have the skills, competencies, qualifications to be successful in the job, you would not continue with their application. Once you've got, 4 to 5 of good applications that you would, think would be successful in the job, we begin screening and reviewing. Okay, so we set up phone interviews to pre-screen our candidates. So this is an essential and initial step going towards an interview. Okay, so you talk to the potential candidate on the phone. You're essentially verifying their resume. Okay, so it's just making sure that they can be professional. You're verifying communication skills. You're making sure what they're telling you matches their resume. Okay, and if you like them, if they fit really well, and they're what they're saying is indicative of their resume and application, then you can move forward with either some employment tests or setting up an interview. Okay. Employment tests, on the other hand, is an additional step that we put into the selection process, and these employment tests are designed so that candidates can demonstrate their personality, competencies, knowledge, performance, and attitudes before we grant them an interview. Okay. Generally speaking, I've never had an employment test. I've never given an employment test. These are additional skills that additional tools that you can use to make sure you're selecting the right applicants for the job. Okay. Personality or aptitude tests exist. Examples that I can think of are True Colors, which is a personality test, or the Myers-Briggs, which is a relatively long personality test. Okay. I'm not sure of any aptitude tests that you can take. Okay. Although you can pull questions like from from either the Red Seal or the CCC to demonstrate knowledge in the area of food. Okay. And yeah, okay, so I've never used employment tests, but again, they could be a good tool for you to make sure that the people coming into your interviews are, initially going to be good candidates for the job. The next 2 steps in the selection process is the interview and the verification of references. Okay, so at this point, we've reviewed and screened applicants. We've done employment tests if we think that's a good idea. And now we've set up interviews and we hold interviews. Okay, so we scatter interviews across a week, and we interview all of our potential candidates. Okay, people that should be at this interview should be human resources or a manager, okay? A supervisor, so the direct reporting supervisor. And the reason why we include multiple people in these interviews is so that there's multiple perspectives on one subject. So it's increased quality of a hiring decision, okay? Um, an example of this is when I interviewed with the college, when I interviewed for my first managerial position, I was interviewed by my general manager and by the owner of the restaurant. So two people. On the other hand, when I interviewed for the full-time position at George Brown College, I was interviewed by human resources, the chair, the dean, two peers within the department. So I believe at the time it was Dr. Wibbs and Dr. Gillies, and somebody else within the organizations at arm's length. So I believe it was, oh goodness, I forget the gentleman's name. Dr. McGrath, I believe it was, from Student Success. Anyway, the reason why there were so many people is they want to make sure they're hiring the right person, and that, when there's more than one person involved in making this decision, it increases the quality of the decision because you have multiple perspectives. And then you verify references. Okay, so you call their references, or you ask for references if they don't have them, and you discuss with the reference the applicant's previous work history. Okay, you're not allowed to, when you're asking for references or asking a referencee questions, you're not allowed to ask for negative information. So you're not allowed to call a candidate's references and be like, okay, so tell me what's not good about this person. You're not allowed to do that. They're not allowed to slander, or you're not allowed to lead a question that would result in slandering of an applicant. So what are you allowed to ask? You're allowed to ask about skills and competencies associated with the job, and you're allowed to ask the referencee to rate the applicant on a scale regarding a particular item. So for example, can you tell me a little bit about, can you rate David's communication skills on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being not very good and 10 being excellent? Okay, so there's a scale, there's a range, and I'm not asking for negative information. Lastly here, applicants are allowed to ask you, if you're the hiring manager or you're the manager hiring, they're allowed to ask you or tell you that the current employer, they might have a job, right? So if they're applying to your job or a new job, they might still be at the place where they work. Okay, it's typically good practice to never quit a job and then go find a job. It's always good to have a job and then apply for others. Okay, so if the applicant says, hey, Dave, and I'm the hiring manager, Dave, my employer doesn't know that I'm looking for another employment opportunity. Okay, here are my references. However, you are only allowed to contact them when an offer is made. So basically what that's telling me is I'm not allowed to check their references until I'm ready to give them the job. Okay, so that way, you know what I mean? I'm not calling, the applicant's work being like, yep, he's looking, we're interviewing this person, and give me, how is this person doing, stuff like that. That might bias the applicant's workplace and change their view about that person. So now we're going to go into a little bit of a deeper dive in the interview, because the interview is a methodological tool that gives you a deep assessment and understanding of who the person you're interviewing is and whether or not they're going to be successful, and ultimately whether or not they lied on their resume. Okay, the ultimate goal of the interview is to determine whether or not a candidate is going to be a strong match for your business and is going to be successful on the job. Okay. The purpose, continuing with the purpose of the interview, what you're doing is you're going into a deeper dive or a deep assessment of the candidate's qualities, experiences, skills, competencies, and yeah. So we're really essentially having a one-on-one conversation, or sorry, having a conversation with somebody about how well they can fit within the job, and for them to give examples and not necessarily a demonstration, but examples of how they would be successful in the job based on their prior work experience. Okay, remember, if we're talking about accounting, the best indication of your future sales are your previous sales. When we're talking about an interview and how someone's going to behave in the future, we want to ask about the past, because past behavior is the best indicator of future behavior. Types of interviews. Okay, so there's typically two kinds of interviews used in our industry. We've already talked about the first one, which is a pre-screening interview where we verify key details of their resumes with respect to their competencies, skills, and rely on predetermined checklist to make sure they're a good fit for the organization. We understand what their goals. And this, of course, is a pre-screening or a prerequisite to moving to the formal interview. The formal interview, as we move down in this chart, is usually a structured interview. Okay, this is a very common methodology within qualitative research, and as it applies in qualitative research, it also applies in interview techniques, in our industry with selecting candidates. So this is a structured face-to-face interview, okay, where you're asking a preset question about the candidate's ability to be successful in the job. Okay, the questions you want to ask potential candidates are behaviorally oriented. So an example of this would be, tell me about a time where you had a conflict with a coworker and how you resolved it. Of course, this question is asking about the past, but it's also asking about how your behaviors, what your behaviors were. Okay. Another example would be, tell me about a time where you exhibit great communication skills. Okay. Again, that question is situated in the past, but it's asking about how the behaviors in the past exemplified communication skills, which were a competency on the job description. So you're starting to see how all these are connected, right? A lot of people wonder, when you go in for an interview, a lot of people are typically a little nervous, right? It's pretty common. I was nervous all of my interviews, and it's really funny because we're probably nervous because we don't do interviews often. It may feel like shots fired because you don't know what's going to be asked. But typically, if you look at the job description is telling you exactly what they want from you and what you need to be able to demonstrate, or at least communicate, so that you are telling them that you're going to be successful in the job. Most of the job or the interview questions that you're going to be asked are coming out of our behavioral questions, of course, but they're coming from the job description, right? In our previous example, it was the communication skills. Okay, so I asked a candidate to demonstrate or describe how their communication skills were in the past by giving me an example. Okay, so a behaviorally oriented question. And that question came from the job description, which included communication skills or communication as a competency. Situational questions, on the other hand, are a good indication of what an applicant or candidate's, what they would do in a particular situation. Okay, you're not asking them how they dealt with something in the past. You're asking them, how would you deal with this? Okay. Situational questions can be pretty tough because you might not know about all the situations they're going to ask you about. Okay. They could be like, okay, if you were, if a guest were to come in, okay, and you were on the line and you noticed that there was no host at the door, what would you do? Okay. In responding to these questions, okay, firstly, before I go on, this is a situation, obviously, that you may or may not have been exposed to in the past, and you're being asked or asking how the applicant would deal with that particular situation. Okay. As an applicant, you should be using the STAR response method. So confirm the situation, how you treated it, what the outcome was, and reaffirm the overall the outcome of the situation, or what the outcome would be. Okay, So basically what these two styles of questions will tell you about a candidate is how they've behaved in the past and how they could behave in the future. And they make up pretty much every interview I've ever had. So the interview process, I'm just going to put these all up here. Okay, so the interview is a process. Okay, obviously we know some things that we do. We have to ask an interviewee some questions, but there are more steps than that. Okay, first we need to prepare ourselves. Okay, so if we're the interviewer, we have to be aware of the questions that we're going to ask, and we need to understand how those connect to the job description. Okay, furthermore, if a set of structured questions have not been provided to us as an interviewer, we have to create them ourselves. We should be designing structural or behavioral interview questions based on the job description. Once you're actually sitting in front of a candidate and you're conducting the interview, you first want to build rapport with the candidate, okay? This will help them understand why you're there, what you're doing, and it's going to help them feel more comfortable in the interview, okay? A good indication that you have not created rapport with an interviewee is if they're sitting in front of you, shaking, are bright red, and are mumbling and can't speak. Okay, that's an illustration of somebody who's terrified of an interview. And a lot of people are. So in creating rapport, makes them feel comfortable and gets rid of that nervousness. Okay, as an interviewer, I want to know what you have to offer and what you want to say. And in order for me to really get in that information from you, I need to make sure that you're comfortable in the interview. So some tactics that I used to employ to gain rapport with interviewees was I wouldn't sit in a busy area. Okay, so I'd sit off to the side to make sure it was private. Okay, I would ask them if they'd like a tea, coffee, pop, or water. Okay, I'd let them know, get comfortable. I'll be right back. Let me know if you need anything. I'd just be very hospitable to them. Okay. And then next, once you've created an established rapport, that's when the information exchange begins. Okay, so step 3 in the interview process, this is where you begin to ask questions of the interviewee, and they are going to answer your questions. They're going to ask you questions. Okay, so this is where the interview really starts to fulfill its purpose, right? So just understanding whether somebody's a good fit for the job or not. Step number 4 is where you end the interview and discuss the next steps with the interviewee. Okay, so this usually sounds a little bit like, thank you for coming today. Thank you for answering my questions. Do you have any additional questions for me as the interviewer? And if they say no, okay, awesome. The next steps are we have other interviewees to have interviews with. Okay. If selected for the position, we'll call you after a decision has been made. Okay. And that's how you kind of end the interview. In some cases, interviewees may ask for feedback on an interview, and that's pretty common. That's pretty common in other industries. I'm not sure how common it is in our industry. I've never been asked for feedback in our industry anyway. And if they ask for feedback, be like, okay, well, at the end of the interviews, we'll send you an email with some detailed feedback about the interview. Okay, based on the feedback, they'll know pretty quick whether they got the job or not. Okay, and then the last step in the interview is the evaluation of how that interviewee did and how that interviewee compares to other interviewees. So you can only really do an evaluation after you've completed all of the interviews. So interviews, while they can be fairly complicated, it starts by interviewer preparation. We want to create rapport with our interviewee. We begin to ask questions and answer questions, creating an information exchange. We end the interview, discuss next step, and then engage in an evaluation of who should be selected, which is what we talk about next. There we go. So once we've gone through the first 4 or 5 steps, an additional step in the selection process is we can do a job preview or an observation shift. Okay, so that's basically If we've performed our evaluation of the interviews and we find two interviewees that were extremely similar and both very strong candidates for this position, we could ask for an observation shift where the candidate would show how they work, how they work with others, how they work with particular pieces of equipment. Okay. And when they do that, they're really showcasing their skills on the job. We do have to pay them because that's ethical and legally responsible. And then we can make a hiring decision based on the interview and an observation shift. Okay. And once the hiring decision has been made, we offer the person the job. They sign their employment contract, uniforms, policies, whatnot. And this marks the end of the hiring decision. However, there are still some do's and don'ts in the interview process itself, which is what we're going to talk about next. So interviewer errors. So like the human resources manager, the person doing the interview or conducting the interview, can make several mistakes. Okay. One is arriving late or unprepared to the interview. Okay. Obviously, that doesn't look very professional. The interviewer can also fail to define a successful profile for a position. Okay. Can not make the candidate feel welcome and whereby not creating rapport with the candidate. Not writing down or using some sort of notepad that indicates what the candidate actually said. It's kind of like you're writing down notes so you can compare or evaluate interviewees across multiple questions. Another area would be using stereotypes or bias to either lead the questions in an interview or be discriminatory in your selection. Okay. And then the final interview error is interviewer domination. Okay. You want to let the candidate do most of the talking. In an interview, you're, as the interviewer, and you're not telling the interview about yourself. Okay. You want to get all the information you can from them, from their lips. So let the candidate do most of the talking. While the interviewer can make quite a few errors, so can the interviewee, and that's what we conclude this video on. So the interviewee can also make errors, okay? And if I've not gotten a job before, and maybe I made one of these errors. If an interviewee arrives late or dresses inappropriately, it's a good indication that they're not terribly professional, and that's somebody you don't want working for your organization. If they failed to research the position and the company, then it's a pretty good indication that they aren't willing to put in the effort to really see if there's a connection between them and the business. Okay. If you have your phone out during an interview, that tells the interviewee that they're not the only thing on the interviewee's mind, and there could be another priority other than the interview. For example, a text message. Sometimes the interviewee can talk a little too much or too little. Okay, you want to be able to give good examples of your past performance and indications of good behaviors and accomplishments and things like that. But sometimes interviewers can use techniques to make an interviewee talk too much or slip themselves up in something they're saying or say something that's not true. One of those techniques is silence. Nobody likes silence. Interviews are inherently stressful situations. If I employ silence in my interview with somebody, and I'm the interviewer, it will cause the interviewee to talk without, how would I say this? Maybe say something that's not true because they don't want the silence. They're going to fill that silence or get rid of that silence by just talking. So it's kind of how they work under pressure, things like that. As an interview, you do not want to badmouth a former employer, or talk negatively about guests. I had a server come in, and I asked her, I asked the server what was her least favorite part of working in hospitality, and she said, "Stupid guests." While she did not talk badly about her former employer, she talked poorly about the people the server was supposed to serve. The server did not get the job. Okay. On the other hand, I was interviewing a potential chef. That chef, I said, why are you leaving your current position? And the chef said, I hate my general manager. And I was like, okay, that's not good. So we didn't hire that particular chef. Typically, just out of, you know, to answer that question, because most people are, any interviewer is going to ask you as an interviewee why you're leaving your current position or seeking new employment. What a good answer to this question is because I'd like to further my career, learn new skills, or I'm ready for a new challenge. Okay, so make it about development. All right. Failing to ask the interviewer any questions is also an error on your part, because you want to make sure that they want to know that you're engaged in this process. This interview is not just about them or you, it's about both of you. So to make it about both of you, you have to ask some questions. Sometimes it's a good idea to set your social media profiles to private. The reason I say this is because some employers will check your social media profile before they offer you an interview or after an interview for evaluation. Okay. I know most teachers, like high school teachers or elementary teachers, they just get social media. They just get rid of it altogether. Okay. So here's some errors that an interviewee can make. I hope you learned quite a bit about the recruitment and selection process. Okay, this is very easily taken immediately into industry. And if you have any questions, well, firstly, thank you for watching this video. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me, and I'll be happy to answer your questions. Have an awesome day.